Without a doubt, one of the most exciting features provided by DVMax is the ability to maintain paperless medical history for each of our patients. If we search for a patient, in this case by clicking the Patients button on the command palette and then typing in the first few letters of the name for which we want to search, then clicking Search, we're taken directly to a patient general information screen such as this. If we are about to review previously entered historical entries or to enter new medical record entries, we wish to view the History tab for this particular patient. By clicking the History tab, DVMax prompts us for the entry of the primary provider of services for this session. There might be multiple clinicians available at your facility. Select the appropriate one, then click OK. DVMax now takes us to the historical screen for this particular patient. Notice these are previously entered historical entries or medical record entries. We call them MREs for medical record entries. In this case, these are presented in reverse chronological order. Notice the most recent item is at the top, whereas the oldest item will be at the bottom. This, of course, is a scrollable list, meaning that the oldest entry will be all the way at the bottom. Notice also to the right of the screen, DVMax has opened an invisible invoice, meaning a small representation of an invoice. As we enter medical record entries, that will cause any associated bill items to add to the invisible invoice. We can watch them add as we go. For instance, if we now wish to provide a new medical record entry for this animal, in this case an examination, we can click the button Add New MRE. We're taken to a new medical record entry screen. It's possible to type in the name of the item we wish to provide, in this case, an exam. Notice instead of putting in the code, I typed in the word exam. By clicking the Tab button on the keyboard, DVMax asks which particular type of exam did we want to provide. Notice to the right of each of the entries is the medical record code of each of these items. Had I chosen to memorize these codes, I could have entered the code instead of the name. DVMax does not require that anybody perform any memorization at all. By selecting the item I wish to provide for this patient and then clicking OK, DVMax knows I now wish to provide an examination or office call for this particular animal. It also knows the staff person who is providing this because we selected that on the previous primary provider screen. It knows today's date. It also knows the time of day. Notice to the bottom of the screen has incorporated a findings entry screen. This permits us to add the individual findings into small boxes for rapid access to this information, meaning it's much like filling out boxes of a stamp that might be used on a paper record. Entry might be made into each of these boxes by typing directly into the associated box adjacent to each of the labels, for instance, the subjective complaints, the temperature, the pulse, respiration, etc. Many of these finding items might also have associated finding options, meaning a pick list from which the user can select a descriptor. In this case, the box is labeled eyes. If we say that we would like to see the DVMax listed options to describe eyes, we're presented with a list of descriptors, in this case specific to eyes, an ophthalmic disease. We can click on whichever of these items is appropriate to describe these eyes. Clicking OK causes the text of that descriptor to flow directly into the box next to the word eyes. The same thing can be done with ears, for instance. By clicking Options, we're brought to a list of descriptors specific to ears. We can click on multiple items if necessary, and notice that upon doing so, we have the text of those items flow directly into the record. Upon clicking OK, DVMax not only presents us with the examination in reverse chronological order, in this case at the top of the list because it's the newest item, but it also caused to be added to the invoice a charge, a bill item in other words, to the little invisible invoice presented to the right. Notice no money is listed, no dollar amount is listed to the right of the screen. That won't be shown until we view the actual invoice. This is simply a small invisible invoice representation of the real invoice. This is therefore a history-driven invoice. One enters in the historical entry, causing DVMax to add a charge to the invoice. By clicking add new MRE again, we can type in another item. In this case, I would like to provide an X-ray. Again, I need not know the code, although if I did know the code, I could have entered that, as we can see the codes off to the right side, and that will cause the same exact item to flow into the animal's medical record. In this case, I chose X-ray. When I choose to OK that item, it flows into the animal's medical record, and the associated charge adds to the invoice. If we add additional items to the patient's medical record, for instance, a pharmacy item, in this case, Clavamox, we can select the particular Clavamox in which we are interested, click OK, type in the quantity of this particular item to be dispensed. Then when we click OK again, not only does this item add again to the animal's history in reverse chronological order, again the newest item is at the top, it also adds to the invoice, as you can see to the right side. We now will need an RX label, a pharmacy label, to apply to this medication for sending it home. By clicking on the item once to highlight it, we can then click on the Print RX Labeler button, and that brings us directly to the RX labeling dialog box. Notice Clavamox 125 is listed appropriately on the left-hand side. The quantity of 14 was taken directly from the medical record entry entered moments ago. The label was automatically provided by DVMax because it is the current default label associated with this particular drug. We can alter it if necessary, but in this case it is correct. If we would like to add refills, meaning we will permit this client to refill this drug again, we can add the number of refills right here on this screen. If we need to have additional copies of this label, for instance, if the quantity were greater than that which would fit in a single bottle, and therefore we might need multiple bottles, we would need multiple copies of this label. We can change the number of copies right here. Notice, because we've been keeping track of our inventory, the expiration date and lot numbers of this particular pharmacy item have also automatically been added to this label. We can now click OK and Print, which will cause a label to be printed for this item, a label that can then be applied to the bottle in which the medication is contained. DVMax can also store generic labels, labels that can be used to label any particular item in the pharmacy list. For instance, if this particular verbiage is not the appropriate verbiage for this particular label, we can delete it and type in specific directions, for instance, TID. Upon hitting the Tab button, DVMax asks which particular type of TID direction would you like, for a capsule, for an ointment, for a solution. If indeed this is a capsule, we can select capsule, and notice DVMax will automatically insert verbiage that makes sense based on the selection made on the previous screen. Give one capsule by mouth 3 times a day, thus a TID capsule direction. We can now click OK and Print, or if we're not ready to print the label now, simply clicking OK will store this information with the animal's record. Since DVMax is keeping track of every single label that was ever printed for this patient, it's possible to review all past RXs by going to the History menu for this patient and selecting Show Past RXs. This then will list every single label that was ever created for this particular patient. That also means that it's possible to open any one of these selections to review the directions that were contained on that label. It's also possible to reprint a label should that ever become necessary.